Europe's agriculture, a disaster for the environment in many places. The landscape, climate and biodiversity suffer. But the EU continues to pump huge sums of money into an obviously ill system.
Organic agriculture must be highly awarded and not, so to speak, the overexploitation of nature.
But an environmentally friendly agricultural policy is not in sight. Why? Is it due to the influence of powerful interest groups?
To call me a lobbyist is a vicious insinuation.
The EU billions are now being redistributed. The chance for a new, more environmentally friendly agricultural policy? Fields for as far as the eye can see. This is the realm of Urban Jülich. He is the managing director of one of the largest agricultural enterprises in Germany, the Bördegrün Company, 2,600 hectares. An agro-factory trimmed for efficiency and mass production. Jülich is a successful large-scale farmer. And yet, he does not seem to be really happy.
It has nothing to do anymore with the agriculture which we find in fairy tale books. We're highly technological, we're incredibly productive, and the demands are growing all the time.
The company produces 10,000 tons of potatoes per year for a French fries manufacturer in northern Germany. Urban Jülich only grows one variety. For the right French fries length, all potatoes should have the same size. The farm uses fertilizers and pesticides to keep yields high, just like all conventional farmers. Thanks to its huge cultivation area, farmer Jülich receives 700,000 euros a year in subsidies from the EU to make sure he can assert himself on the world market.
Meanwhile, 65% of the potatoes grown are processed and end up in finished products. In other words, we're actually competing with frozen French fries from America. We have a global market.
With its billions, the EU is promoting the emergence of such agro-giants. This is because the money is distributed by area, not by ecological criteria. This farm stands for the exact opposite. Organic farmer Andreas Hatzel works on just 200 hectares according to the rules of the Bioland label. The family business east of Munich also cultivates potatoes. 20 different varieties without the use of artificial fertilizers and chemical pesticides.
I've learned my profession conventionally, in the classic way. And when you drive over the field with chemical fertilizer for the 10th time, you wonder whether that can really be good, especially when it comes to insecticides. That was a real initial spark for me.
Organic farmer Hatzel also receives money from the EU, 55,000 euros annually for his cultivation area and another 50,000 euros extra from Bavaria as a special organic premium. But unlike conventional large-scale farming, the money here is used for agriculture, which most citizens like, because it protects the landscape, the soil and the climate. There are only two viable business models in EU-funded agriculture: huge conventional farms such as Bördegrün or organic farming such as Hatzelhof. Since 1960, the number of farms has decreased by 80%, from 1.5 million to around 300,000. Small conventional farms are threatened with extinction. The EU's Common Agricultural Policy has been in existence since 1957, when the aim was to produce sufficient food for a growing population. Today, Europe's farmers should be competitive on the world market, but this will only work with billions in subsidies. Around 38% of the EU budget, 58 billion euros per year, go to agriculture. Of which 6.3 billion euros go to Germany. These will be split up. 5 billion go to the so-called first pillar as pure area payments per hectare. The second pillar mainly supports rural areas. Only a small part of the payments is directly linked to environmental measures such as the planting of green areas. EU agricultural policy rewards size. If you have a lot, you get a lot. Beneficiaries of the first pillar are farmers like Urban Jülich with their huge agricultural areas. Small farms are not profitable. Today, half of Europe's agricultural land is owned by just 3% of farms. The EU primarily promotes yield maximization because of cheap competition on the world market. On the other hand, considerably less money is provided for organic farming. The consequences can be seen on fields like these: quiet, empty landscapes, a hostile space. Weed killers like glyphosate turn fields into red-brown deserts. Is the GAP, the EU's common agricultural policy, responsible for the extinction of insects, birds and other species? A visit to the Münsterland in Germany. Employees of the Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union are looking for the first lapwings that come here again from the south to breed. Since the 1990s, their numbers have dropped by almost 90%. For Christian Lilje, the farm birds are symbolic of our misguided approach to nature.
In my opinion, our fate as humanity is much more closely connected with the fate of lapwings than we would like it to be, because it only shows that ecosystems are becoming more and more unstable. And the lapwing is simply a very visible indication that everything is becoming less and less.
Lapwings like to breed in the fields, but about 3/4 of their nests are destroyed every year by intensive agriculture. To ensure that the farmers take consideration here, the men mark the breeding places. They will hardly be able to save the population as a whole with such measures, because the birds simply lack their food bases, insects and their larvae.
If GAP sticks to business as usual, if nothing fundamentally changes, then we will not stop insect mortality. Then we will lose the lapwing from our landscape. But then we will also end up facing farmers with court rulings, with bans and with regulations. Agriculture will then be driven against the wall, and we will ultimately have a catastrophic situation for both nature and agriculture.
Intensive agriculture also plays a major role in climate change, accounting for 14%. That is what the Federal Environment Agency, Germany's most important environmental authority, says. It calls for the rejection of a principle that has existed for decades.
EU agricultural policy doesn't sufficiently promote environmentally friendly behavior. Our recommendation is that the farmers which do most for the environment and nature conservation should get the most money through EU agricultural subsidies, and the farmers who cultivate the most land should no longer receive the most money.
It's a big idea. Spend public money on projects that are becoming increasingly important for Europe's citizens. Climate protection, species protection, conservation of natural resources. Progressing here would be an opportunity for the German Farmers Association to underline its role for the common good. 90% of all German farmers are organized in it. June 2018, German Farmers' Day in Wiesbaden. 700 farmers officials discussed the most pressing issues. Also, the distribution of the EU billions. But a glance at the agenda shows that environmental protection is hardly discussed here. Instead, they absolutely want to stick to the EU area payments. In her speech, Agriculture Minister Julia Klöckner emphasizes that the money from the GAP is well invested. She was not available for an interview for this film, officially due to time constraints.
Those who believe that with regard to the question of insect mortality, environmental protection and climate protection, only agriculture is to blame for everything, are too lazy to make their own contribution so that we can continue to develop together.
Damit wir gemeinsam weiter uns entwickeln können.
By virtue of her office, the Minister of Agriculture is responsible for the common good. But her closeness to the farmers' officials is more likely to lead to a different conclusion.
I'm fighting for you. I know how you feel and I also know what you achieve.
She can be sure of the applause of the functionaries. Everything should remain the way it is for the farmers. But why are the farmers' representatives so vehemently opposed to a reorientation of the common agricultural policy? The advertising boards of the Farmers' Day sponsors give first indications. Who's interwoven with whom in German agriculture? A new study by the Institute for Work and Economics at the University of Bremen on behalf of the German Society for Nature Conservation is investigating this question. It deals with the connections between the officials of the German Farmers Association and politicians, with companies from the agro-industry as well as other companies that are close to agriculture. For example, from the food and finance industry as well as the chemical industry.
These are the big players here: BASF, Bayer Crop Science, Syngenta, etc.
The scientists have uncovered a total of 560 connecting lines.
There are plenty of opportunities to exchange ideas.
The study names 75 companies, associations and even parties. The focus is on a particularly powerful player.
This spider in the web in the network is the German Farmers Association.
The scientists revealed that the functionaries and the management team apparently don't only represent the interests of the farmers. One example is President Joachim Ruckwied. For him alone, the study lists 18 positions and management levels of the agricultural industry.
Here we have shown what Mr. Ruckwied's most important positions are in individual areas. Here, for example, supervisory board member at the large R&V insurance, or in the banking industry, at the agricultural Rentenbank, the bank with the interest to granting loans, etc. Then we have the whole area of agriculture and the food industry, like the position on the supervisory board of BayWa, which of course has an interest in selling as many resources as possible, like fertilizers and pesticides to agriculture. Mr. Ruckwied wears various hats, and of course we can't tell when and how he represents which interest.
The other members of the Farmers' Union also hold top positions in companies close to agriculture. These men represent institutions that earn from farmers. This also applies to the General Secretary of the Farmers' Union. But Bernhard Krüsken sees no conflict of interest.
These are all companies owned by farmers, and that's important. Because if agriculture withdraws to the role of a raw material supplier, we believe it will lose relatively quickly. And the companies you just mentioned are all companies where the owners are farmers. This is the classic cooperative model, even if one or the other operates in the legal form of a stock company.
But most of these companies are market leaders in their sector, generate billions in sales and are by no means only interested in the well-being of farmers. Only a small circle of farmers' officials obviously profits. Not only do they earn within, but also from agriculture, with machines, animal feed, pesticides and much more. Demanded by thousands of farmers, ultimately financed from EU subsidies. A system that the profiteers want to preserve by all means.
For decades, the German Farmers' Union has managed to build up a network structure, very professional structures in order to exert a corresponding influence on the decision-making process both in politics and in the opinion-forming process in society.
The EU's agricultural policy can hardly be reformed with the Farmers' Union. But what about Brussels, the European Parliament? On this day, the EU Committee on Agriculture is to vote on a proposal from the Commission. Area payments are to be reduced. That would be a disaster for large farms. Would it not then be possible to invest the saved money in measures for more environmental and climate protection? Many hope so. The EVP has a majority in the Agriculture Committee, a coalition of conservative parties, including the CDU-CSU. Albert Dess has been the EVP spokesman in the Committee on Agriculture for 10 years. The CSU politician is considered the most powerful man there. At the same time, he is chairman of the board of the Bayernland AG in Bavaria, one of the largest dairies in Germany, a company that wants to buy milk from farmers as cheap as possible. Isn't there a conflict?
To call me a lobbyist is a vicious allegation. My population has known me in the district of Neumarkt since my youth. I had the best election results in all of Bavaria. In 2004, when I ran for the European Parliament for the first time, there were over 30 parties on the list. I got 70.1% for my party. People who know me would all reject such insinuations.
Of course, Dess has also been active in the German Farmers' Union for over 40 years. On top of that, he is now also a member of the Special Committee for the Approval of Plant Protection Products. Finally, he is a member of the advisory board of BayWa, Germany's largest agricultural trading company with a turnover of 16 billion euros. Their range also includes pesticides. His position on insect mortality is hardly surprising.
Agriculture in my community today is no different than it was 40 years ago. Why should it now be responsible for insect mortality?
But there are many pesticides to blame.
Wait a minute. 40 years ago, we had 70% pesticides with a skull on them. We no longer have them. 40 years ago, we had much worse pesticides, and that didn't bother the insects. The discussion is hypocritical.
But he should know better. A large number of studies have shown that agriculture has been using extremely effective pesticides for many years and has a significant share of insect mortality. Just a few minutes before the vote, Albert Dess and his EVP group will reject the Commission proposals. The threat of a stop of direct payments is off the cards for the time being. There will therefore be no new common agricultural policy before the European elections. Dess can be satisfied with the result, and above all, with himself.
I always said that I wouldn't exchange this position of being the spokesman for the largest group with any of the 28 agriculture ministers, because I have more influence here than a national agriculture minister. Without wanting to devalue it, national agriculture ministers have different tasks, but here I always have discussion partners from Europe, from all over the world. In my office were the ministers of agriculture from Britain, the United States, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia and Africa. My discussion partners were from all over the world.
A world that will continue to be supplied with subsidized European agricultural products. Maria Neuchel, a German Social Democrats agriculture expert in Brussels, calls for a radical restructuring of EU agricultural policy.
Where does it say that the world market must be our first market? I'm not against trade, nor am I against exporting anything to the outside world, but I stand for an agriculture that makes it very clear. Our first playing field is Europe, is regionality, and I would see Europe as regionality. It is absurd for us to ship milk to Australia and for Australian milk to be shipped to us. Both are dumped on the world market. The Australian farmers are no longer earning, the Germans are no longer earning, and everyone is surprised. Staple foods must not be driven around the world.
A sick system supported by billions in subsidies. Every cent of it is tax money from EU citizens, from all of us. Can consumers influence this system, for example, with their shopping? Ursula Hudson, president of the Slow Food Association, has dealt with this question. She bought products from conventional agriculture and knows what's behind it.
This flour, which is very, very cheap, has of course hidden costs in the background, which we all pay. The costs when soils, for example, slowly become infertile due to excessive fertilization. If there are too many pesticides in it. So we all pay somewhere for this cheap price of food in our supermarkets and discounters.
Second example, pork. It's cheap, also because the concentrated feed for the animals is cheap. The reason, it mainly comes from fields subsidized with EU billions.
In the large fattening farm that gives us such cheap meat like this one, there's actually only one type of pig that can be fed up to 120 to 150 kilos in a very short time. Again, using a lot of concentrated feed, but also completely ignoring species-appropriate animal husbandry.
Ursula Hudson's conclusion, often without knowing it, we consumers support a misdirected agricultural industry with our purchasing, to the detriment of the general public and the environment.
Consumers alone can't solve the problem due to the policy decisions of the last decades.
So it has to be solved by the politicians somehow. Berlin. A possible reform of the EU's agricultural policy will be decided not only by the politicians in Brussels, but ultimately by the national governments. The German Bundestag also has an agricultural committee. Renate Künast is part of it. From 2001 to 2005, she was Germany's only Green Minister for Agriculture and knows the priorities of her colleagues.
As always, the pressing issues facing the agricultural industry are being discussed particularly intensively by one part of the committee. Those are the people who always say, "we as farmers," and who calculate this individually on the basis of business management. They don't say "I as an MP."
And indeed, 85% of the members of the Committee on Agriculture alone have a farm, are with the Farmers' Union, or even hold an important position there. In the committee, they have the power to block reforms. Renate Künast warns, personal interests should not override public interest, no matter in which agricultural committee. She calls for a new system for the distribution of EU subsidies.
One that actually follows the principle of public money for public services, that a very large part of it, at least 15 billion euros, is actually turned into a nature conservation fund, and then the farmers are financed for clear nature measures. This is in the public interest. It is necessary because of the loss of biodiversity, because of the climate crisis. We have to pay farmers for this, for conversion and restructuring. Organic farming must be highly rewarded and not, so to speak, the overexploitation of nature.
Renate Künast is, however, quite alone in the committee with these ideas. The majority of the committee does not want to shake up the main pillar of EU subsidies, direct payments depending on crop area. Here too, the same situation as in Brussels. For the majority, economic interests obviously take precedence over measures to protect people from the consequences of climate change and species extinction. Back to the study of the Institute Arbeit und Wirtschaft, Work and Economy. The scientists have analyzed the lobby network of the German Farmers Association down to the tiniest ramification.
Die Zielsetzung unserer Studie war, dass wir herausfinden.
The aim of our study was to find out why the most varied reforms, the need for adaptation, cannot be implemented in European and German agricultural policy. Are there any political influences, lobbying?
An politischen Einflüssen, an Lobbyismus.
The researchers also came across the amazing power of a little-known organization, the Forum Moderne Landwirtschaft, Modern Agriculture, or FML for short. The forum's internet presence is solid and harmless. It provides information about agriculture in glossy pictures, not a word about environmental problems, factory farming, and extinction of species. Instead, for example, an article justifying the use of glyphosate. One of the initiators of the FML is the Farmers' Union.
The forum has nothing to do with politics, but the forum is a foundation of different players from agriculture with the aim to inform.
Aus dem vor- und nachgelagerten Bereich der Landwirtschaft mit dem Ziel zu informieren.
The heads of the Modern Agricultural Forum are top managers, for example in agrochemistry, which earns from the sale of glyphosate and other pesticides. or from the Raiffeisenverband, with former agricultural politicians who are close to the Farmers Association. So much prominence just for a little information?
We assume that it's a bit more than that, namely an attempt to coordinate, to clarify political positions, and then to act in the direction of politics.
At the head of the forum is the Farmers Association's president Joachim Ruckwied. On the advisory board, the head of the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, responsible for the approval of pesticides. Industry lobbyists and representatives of state authorities in a cozy community. For decades, a misguided policy has created vast agricultural deserts. And yet they still exist, islands of biodiversity with smaller fields, interrupted by hedges and forests, where agriculture is respectful of the environment, of insects and of other animals. Such an area can be found around the eco-village Brodowin, north of Berlin. With 1,400 hectares, it is the largest organic farm in Germany. Here they work according to the strict Demeter principles. The feed for the cows must be 100% organic, half of it from their own cultivation. The idea is to keep everything in one cycle to protect the environment.
We grow something on the field, we harvest it, and in this plant which we harvested, there is naturally energy. The nutrient of the soil is in it. This plant, which we partially process, for example, we sell the grain to bake bread, but a large part is eaten by our animals. The animals produce manure. We get the compost and take it back to the fields.
An over-fertilization with liquid manure, as in conventional agriculture, is excluded in this cycle economy. This farm also receives area payments from the EU, just like all farms. The crop losses typical of organic farming cannot, however, be compensated for by these funds. This can only be achieved by direct marketing and the higher price of organic food. The eco-village proves that organic farming also works on a large scale and has a future.
I don't blame any farmer for what's happened so far, because we've been trained for it. We are doing exactly what was expected of us. We've reduced costs and rationalized. Conventional agriculture in particular. And here in Brodowin, we've simply experienced that there are other possibilities, other ways, and that it can be incredibly exciting as a farmer to do more than produce.
More subsidies from Europe for the protection of the environment would obviously be well invested here, for an agriculture that feeds people and preserves their livelihoods.